Welcome to the stream today. We're going to be discussing OJ Made in America, which is a 5-part miniseries, which adds up to, I think, 7 hours and 47 minutes altogether, a little under 8 hours. But I don't know that anyone has probably sat and binged through 8 hours. I don't have that kind of time in my life to sit and binge through an 8-hour miniseries. Not that it wasn't compelling television, it certainly was. And I think that's what so struck me is I heard about this documentary second or third hand in a certain sense. Steve Kim was commenting on Jason Whitlock's podcast about, I think, the passing of OJ. I don't remember when OJ passed away, but some time ago. And Steve Kim had mentioned this documentary was not just probably the best documentary on the OJ Simpson situation, one of the best documentaries he'd ever seen. And I thought, okay, it's a bit of overstatement. Just made a mental note to myself. But it is not overstatement. This documentary is not just probably the best documentary on the OJ Simpson trial and the situation of OJ, but it's one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. And everything about it is right. It has a beautiful, haunting soundtrack. He manages to intersperse historical footage and audio with people who were part of that trial and part of that process and having conversation with them at that time. And it's just so well done. And it came out years ago. And I didn't know about it. And I remember as I was going through, I think it was episode 3, I remember sending a message to one of my friends that I said, "Stop whatever you're watching, and you need to watch this. OJ Simpson Made in America, or OJ Made in America." And one of the men I know, he said, "Oh yeah, I saw this with my wife some years ago." He's like, "Yeah, it was pretty good." No, I said, "It's not pretty good. It's amazing." And so, why is it amazing? So you've heard me talk about this for a few minutes now. Okay, so why is it amazing? Because nobody knew at the time that there were all of these different threads tying into what was about to happen. So let's talk about some of those threads. The first is race in America. So this is a theme that I talk about on the channel, that one of the problems about one of the challenges about talking about race is many people have decided to make racism the worst thing in the history of mankind. Racism is terrible. And yes, racism's bad, but it's not the worst thing happening on the planet. It doesn't rank with, the genocide of children in Gaza. Racism doesn't even, it's not even on the same wavelength. The murder of children in the womb doesn't even match. For the idea that God is not loved and honored the way that he should be loved. All of those things far more important than racism. But for a people who is detached from, I think, some of these realities, racism becomes the most evil thing possible. So if you think it's the most evil thing possible, that means you can't even exchange with somebody who you think is that way. And on the other side of things, you won't even listen if somebody alleges that there's an issue of race, because you have to protect yourself. You say, "Well, I can't possibly be that because that's the worst thing ever." And so if you can't have a discussion about race, then you can't go anywhere. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have in the United States. America has this particular problem of the fast response from many Americans. "Well, I'm not racist. I have blank friends, whatever the blank is. So you don't like black people. Well, that's not possible because I have black friends. You don't like Jewish people. That's not possible. I have Jewish friends." And that's not an answer. The question has to be simply, do you feel that some people in the United States don't feel comfortable around people of another race? Yes or no? Is that possible? Okay. Yes, that's possible. Why is that? And start to have that discussion. Have it in a calm manner. Keep your voice tone as neutral and level as possible, and just see where it goes with people. But the reality is, in America, we're not prepared to talk about race, which is why when we have something like Black Lives Matter, the response has to be all lives matter. Blue Lives Matter. There has to be a counter slogan. Instead of just asking the question, is it statistically shown that people of a certain race in America, certain color, they get pulled over, they get in altercations with police over and over and over in a higher proportion based on the percentage of the population that they are than other people. Okay, yes, fine. Why is that? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's racist, but we have evidence. So let's look at it scientifically and say, okay, well, why is this the case? So we can't have any of those discussions. It's racist to even have those discussions. But we have to be able to have those discussions if we're going to talk about race in America. So, one of the through lines of the O.J. Simpson case, race in America, not really discussed in the 90s, not really discussed today, except weaponized as an attack vector that you can hit somebody with. So, that's one of the threads of the trial. The second is the LAPD. The LAPD, particularly after the Watts riots, did not have a good record with the Black community. This is documented. The documentary does a very good job of showing cases of injustice in which people were able to look back and say, that was wrong, that was wrong, that was wrong. So we have the LAPD as a through line. The Black community has seen injustice done to them over and over. And there's that sitting in the background. Then you have Rodney King and the riots. How old was I? Maybe 11 or 12 years old when the riots happened, and I was living in Los Angeles. And we were all evacuated down into the basement of the school, and our parents had to come pick us up. And there were men coming by our school, shouting, "No justice, no peace." And I'm an 11 or 12-year-old kid. I don't really know what's going on the news. I don't. I don't. I'm not keeping up on things. So what would an 11? I'm just scared. We're all being huddled down in the basement. Our parents are coming to pick us up, and then we go home that night and watch it on the news, and it's horrifying. But there's this outrage around Rodney King. Now, was Rodney King an angel? No. I think everybody can look back at that and say that. But that's also the counter argument. Same thing happened with George Floyd, right? So people said George Floyd was on fentanyl. He was a bad guy. 100%. The problem is we allow this example and say, oh, look at this one media example of this person who was a bad person. And finally, let's say being bad caught up with them. And then this is the example. No, for every George Floyd, there are 9 or 10 other cases of real injustice that happened, but you never heard about it because it wasn't captured on camera. But the idea that there is no injustice happening, that the police force is mostly good guys, we just have too many incidents of that happening in America, but we can't talk about it without being racist. And that's an issue. That's an issue. So you have that through line. Fourth through line, celebrity culture and sports in America. So in America, we worship celebrities. I think they do in other countries as well, but I'm American. Speaking about Americans, it really was, in a sense, generational with OJ. So OJ was a man who he had said, I don't want to be white or black. I just want to be OJ. And he lived very comfortably in this white world. That's why he was on these Hertz commercials. And there was a fear of it while they were filming. They mentioned this in documentary. OJ is running through an airport and they say, okay, it's a black man running through an airport. Is he running from the police? And they have this old grandma saying, go, OJ, go, to make it safe. And OJ lived very comfortably in that world. And he moves into this after making a big career in football, American football. He then continues on commenting on news. He stars in some films, again, doing some other advertising, but he's trying to build an empire for himself. And one in which he doesn't have any relationship to civil rights issues. And very famously, there was I think a boycott or pending boycott for the Olympics in '68. He said he didn't have any comment on it. And I'm not saying you have to or you don't have to, but this, as explained later, this sort of pivot to the Black community after the trial. And then sports. So celebrity culture and sports, I'm going to lump them together as one thread, that these people get to do whatever they want in America. They have privilege that the rest of us don't have. Very famously, OJ runs from an arrest for battering his wife. and nothing happens to him because he's a celebrity. That wouldn't happen to anyone else. They would have been caught and put in jail. Fifth through line, reality television and the trial. The O.J. Simpson trial was, in a way, one of the very first reality television shows. Every day it was being broadcast on CNN. I was in school at the time, and we were watching it. And even the Bronco chase, I was in a boarding school at the time, and his Bronco was going up the part of the freeway where I would normally, my parents would pick me up and we'd come up that same freeway. Strange coincidence. But that Bronco had gone ahead way before my parents had come to get me. And everyone was talking about it. And when when the verdict came out, there was cheering going on because a lot of people had thought that he was framed. That was the narrative. I'm just speaking as a high school student at the time in California. There was big cheering all across campus because we had thought that OJ had been framed. We weren't really following the trial. And then there was the famous glove demonstration. If uh, if the glove does not fit, you must acquit. Everybody knows that line. So all of these different threads come together to then have a referendum and have the trial not necessarily be a referendum on the murder of these two people by another person, but a referendum on race in America, police brutality and injustice in Los Angeles, and Rodney King. And all of that comes together in a toxic brew. And they interviewed two of the jurors, and the jurors say they only deliberated because part of it was payback for Rodney King. They admitted it on camera on television. And so people will say that the prosecution botched it. Mark Furman, that's a separate discussion, and maybe we'll get into that in the chat. But it's fair to say that we saw that counteracted in the civil trial when the Goldmans pursue OJ there and they nail him, and he's convicted beyond not beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond a probable. I think it's probable, whatever it is, 60%, 51%, whatever it is. And people say it was Santa Monica, it was a different colored jury. Okay, fine, all of that. But the point is, at that point, OJ might say, all right, I got away with murder. I got nailed with this civil penalty, but I don't have to pay it. And he just sort of moves his life, goes away to Florida. And everyone says, why can't you just stay squeaky clean? But the thing is, OJ thought that he was unstoppable. And so what does he do? He gets himself into trouble, effectively an armed robbery in Las Vegas, and goes to jail. And many people say there was a lot of justice there. I'm not going to comment on that. All I'm going to say is that he couldn't keep his nose clean, goes away to jail, and then eventually dies. I'll stop for a moment, head to the chats. He died? Yeah, as far as I know. Is race a scientific fact? Look, I don't have the equipment to have that discussion. All I'm talking about is the Black community. So if you don't believe that there are Black people in Los Angeles, like, I don't know what to tell you. Dr. Hamid, ethnicity is immutable, race is a category of the mind. I don't know. I don't know about parsing race or ethnicity in this discussion. I'm simply trying to talk about the fact that in America, not just today, not just in the 1950s and 1960s, but in 1990, when O.J. Simpson was going to trial, there was a problem with the Black community, the Los Angeles Police Department, and this trial. That's a fact. So whether you want to call Black a race or an ethnicity, I'll leave it to other people. But the point I'm trying to make is that this was an issue of the trial, which nobody was really planning for. The prosecution didn't, but the defense certainly did. And the prosecution was on the back foot as a result of that. As I said, a beautiful soundtrack. Perspectives were heard. You could hear the producer, the director, I think, in one of the times where he just frustrated. I think he uses profanity when he's asking the juror, how did you, all of these months of trial, how did you deliberate? And part of it was they had been sequestered for all of these months away from their family. Months and months and months. Can't talk to anybody. Can't talk to fellow jurors. They just have to go back to their room every day, watch TV, go to bed. That was all they could do. No internet, no television. I mean, I suppose they could watch television, but there was no outside communication. And as the juror said, I didn't need to deliberate all that time. Every night I'd come back and I was thinking about one more thing. And then they all went in there. And so I do think that that's understandable that a lot of people probably came in with an idea after that being the only thing in their life for these many months. But at the same time, them admitting on camera that part of it was retribution for Rodney King is disturbing, at least, the very least. But as I say, the the documentary really unfolds like a giant tragedy of sorts, in a way, because OJ is built up in the documentary. They show how he rose. He grew up in the ghetto. His father was homosexual. Comes from a broken home. Marries, steals his best friend's girl. Marries her, ditches her to marry an 18-year-old. I don't know. This is not still the part of the rise, but he manages to break all these race barriers, which still existed at the time, becomes this pitchman, actor, businessman, moneymaker, and then kills his wife and a stranger. And where does the fall come from there? And as I've been reading more about the trial all these years later, I am struck by just how much I didn't know, how much I was tuned out of as a high school kid, understandably. But also all the other things, as I noted, were going on. Um, I suppose that last thing I I would talk about. Um, we have here. Did you watch Trump on Rogan? Uh, believe it or not, I did. And what's funny is I've not watched that much Trump in years. I don't think in all of my years, in all the years he's been around, I've never watched him talk for that long. If you, because it's like a 3 hour, and I watched it on 2x, so it's only about 90 minutes for me of watching it. But one of the points he makes on there is about defunding the police, and this was quite possibly the dumbest reaction possible. So yes, there's injustice, and we have to ask questions, but the answer isn't let's get rid of the police force, because then who are you going to have to protect you? And so I think the issue has to be let's have a conversation in our communities. Let's make sure our police have the best training possible, and let's try to move forward. But part of that is having a conversation and saying, if you don't feel heard, be heard, and move forward. But in America, we cannot have a conversation about race because it is the worst thing ever. And people just lose their minds and scream and make accusations. All right. I didn't expect that anyone would have necessarily watched it because I only announced it last week and it's 8 hours. And as I said, unless you were watching an episode a night every night this week, you wouldn't necessarily have watched it. But did anyone um, have any particular connection with the trial? Did they dig into the legal documents? Did they think that he was innocent, then realized he was guilty? Or thought he was guilty and now thinks he's innocent? I'm open to whatever. If there are no other questions or comments in the chat, I will head out a little early because I'm hosting another live stream on Israelism for my Palestine Bookshelf channel, which is a fascinating film. So if you didn't have plans to join for that, please consider heading over to Palestine Bookshelf to discuss that. Very fine documentary. Totally different subject, but I think following some of the same filmmaking principles of interviewing people from all sides, having a clear through line, a clear narrative, asking difficult questions, and not necessarily providing the answers, but just pointing in a particular direction. So lots to like about that. I'll talk about that more in a little bit, but I'll just wait another minute or so, see if anyone has any questions or thoughts. Otherwise, I will wrap up the stream. So next week we'll be discussing The Last Dance, which is a film about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. And um, well, I'll leave it there. I'm going to start talking about it now, but I realize it's in the same category as this, a very fine sports documentary. And I think one that has set the tone for many other sports documentaries that have come in the last 5 years, I think have come from the way that The Last Dance was shot, presented, and given. Very fine documentary. And that's what we'll be doing next week. But for now, Leo says, I'll watch the documentary. All right, Leo. And then come back to the comment section from the stream and let us know what you thought. Do you believe there is credibility to OJ theory? Tomas, I don't know what OJ theory is. Or if is it an OJ theory or the OJ theory? I don't know. You'll have to give me a little bit more. All right. You can put more questions in the comment section. And if you'd like to nominate future documentaries for us to watch on Film Club, I'm happy to hear it. Otherwise, I'll see you over on Palestine Bookshelf. We'll be live there in about 10 minutes talking about Israelism. Thanks for stopping by.